Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. First and foremost, I want to thank you for attending. My name is Karen. I'm a facilitator at Circles. I'm also a social worker, and I've been working in various different settings over the last 15 or so years. At the moment at Circles, I'm running 2 different grief groups and have been with Circles for about a year now. With me today is Lara Noik, a fellow Circles facilitator, who will be presenting today on how to navigate your grief from having lost a spouse. Lara, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Karen. So my name's Lara and I am a social worker and I'm also a Circles facilitator. And as you can hear from my accent, I come from Johannesburg, South Africa. I have a special interest in the fields of mental health, of relationships, and of resilience, and a very, very special place in my heart for group work, and have really worked in various different group settings, specifically over my career, also approximately 15 years or so, and I facilitate grief groups at Circles, and I'm just very privileged to be with you doing this presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Lara. So for those of you that don't know Circles, Circles is a leading platform for emotional support that ensures that no one has to overcome life's challenges alone. So it's built on the core principle that in order to overcome life's challenges, you need to be heard and supported by people who actually understand what you're going through. So what our platform does is it matches people who are going through the same challenges in their lives, such as loss of a loved one. And each circle is led by a mental health professional. And together they create a safe space to chat weekly via video and support each other through their healing process. Everybody who's attended this event is going to be getting a special offer from Circles, as you should see on your screen. And what it is, 30% off to a circle, and most importantly, actionable tips that will help you feel better starting today. So before we begin and officially get started, I just want to mention a few logistical things. This is a webinar, meaning there is a one-way audio and video. So you can see us and hear us, but we can't see you or hear you. But that being said, we do really want to hear from you. So we will answer all your questions that you have. If you have them, please put them in the chat and you can submit them and we will pick them up on our screen. And without further ado, let's get started. Lara, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Karen. Okay, let's put this presentation up. There we go. Okay, so I'm hoping you can all see the presentation up on the screen. And as Karen said, that in this webinar, what we're going to be talking about is we're really going to be talking about the specific loss of a spouse, which is a very specific type of grief and loss we're going to be talking about. And how do we adjust, or how do we move, or what does the journey look like from we to me? Okay, specifically what we're going to be looking at over the next maybe hour or slightly less than that now, is we're going to be looking at the unique challenges when losing a spouse, so the unique features of this type of loss. We're also going to be looking at the grief process, and with a specific emphasis on anger, on guilt, and on loneliness. And I think these are 3 very important features, or 3 very prominent features when we look at loss, and specifically when we're looking at losing a spouse. So these are 3 things we're going to be looking at. And then finally, we're going to move on to looking a little bit at that healing journey and looking at the journey to finding ourselves again, the journey to finding yourself again. So that's a little bit of an agenda of what we're going to be covering. Okay, so let's look first at this, losing a spouse, a unique loss. So one of the things we know is that losing a spouse is actually rated as one of the most stressful events that a person will go through in their entire lives. So just sit with that for a second and think, right? There are many things that people go through in their lives, and this is actually rated as one of the most stressful life events. And why is that? Let's look at that. Let's look at the anatomy of that a little bit over the next couple of minutes. And I think the first thing that we need to understand is that losing your spouse, you are losing your best friend. You are, and this is what some people have told me, that there are many people that come into our lives, but this is the person you chose. This is the person that you chose to journey through your life with together. This is your best friend. This is your other half, so to speak, right? This is the person that you've chosen. And what is a best friend? I mean, this is, and we'll go through some of the things. This is the person who knows you, who's there for you, who gets you. This is the person that you chose. It's also your go-to support, or what I like to call that phone call, right? And this comes out a lot in the grief groups that we do. And when people say, you know, I say to people, who is that phone call when something happens, whether it's something good, right? Good news happens, something exciting happens that you want to share, right? Or something bad happens, you know, the geyser bursts, there's something leaking in the house, something happens, right? There's that go-to phone call. And who is that? That is often your spouse. And often people will talk about, through the grieving process, that something happens, they reach for the phone, and then they realize, you know, that phone call's not available anymore. This is a person who cared for your needs and your well-being. And obviously every spousal relationship, or every relationship, is different. Very, very different. But this is somebody who cared for your needs. Maybe in some relationship cared for your physical needs, for your emotional needs, for your financial needs, for all your different needs. And this is a person who, you know, knew how you took your coffee in the morning, knew if you wanted your salad dressing on the side, knew, you know, your financial needs, or shops you liked to go shopping at, what the budget was for the month. This is a person over years that took over, that looked after your needs and well-being. I think this next point is an interesting one that often is not spoken about, and I really just wanted to speak about that. It's your source for physical intimacy and comfort. And especially when it comes to the physical intimacy, you know, that is a huge, huge loss. That is something that's a huge part of us as human beings. And you lose that. And it's not something that people feel comfortable to talk about. And to talk about the loss of the closeness, of that absolute physical closeness, and the trust and the support and the comfort that comes from that. And that's not something you get anywhere else. That is something that often over years and years you find tuned to fit, to get each other. And there's a deep level of trust that comes with that. And I think I really wanted to mention it because I know that that's a loss that comes up, and that's not often spoken about, and not often addressed, but something that I think needs to be. We look at logistics and practicalities, right? So there's also a lot of logistics and practicalities that this is somebody that you've been living with, right? And we look at things such as financial stress and worries. If your spouse was the breadwinner, what happens now? How is that going to affect us in terms of our monthly budget? Or how's that going to affect me? Can I continue living in this place? Right? What insurance is available to me? What resources do I have that I can use? What are the legal aspects that I haven't even considered before? We need to be looking and navigating and looking at all these things. And of course, as we know, and we're going to talk about that just now, that, by the way, South Africa just now means in a few minutes, not just now, but we're going to be looking at that in a few minutes, you know. When you're in such a place of grief, the last thing you want to be doing is looking at checks and balances, right? So how do you navigate all of that when you're in such a place of pain as well? You're single again. When last were you single? What does it mean to be single? How does this mean in terms of my identity, which we're also going to come to just now? You sometimes feel like a third wheel. You're going out with these couple friends that you've been going out with for years and years, and suddenly you're the third wheel because you're not in the couple anymore. And there's a huge, huge change in dynamic. The pressure to start dating, and that often comes way too soon for people. Not the dating, the pressure. People are pushing people often, way before they're ready. And we're going to look at what being ready means, if you're ever ready. So we're going to look at that also a bit later in the presentation. And, going to the next part, pushing to move on before you're ready. This idea that I need to move on. What does moving on even mean? Is moving on even possible? So that's something to look after. And then dating itself, even if you have made the decision and you are at the stage when you're ready to do that, that's just like a minefield, and something that you've never done or you haven't done for many, many years and don't feel comfortable doing. And there, lots of frogs and not so many princes, as some of my group members who have reached that stage will tell me. So yeah, being single again is a mind frame and something to get used to, and what that means. When you get that wedding invitation, +1, and it's just me. It's not for the couple. How do I arrive on my own? How do I navigate this world as a single person when I've been navigating it as a dyad, as a twosome, as a couple? And now I've got to navigate that as a single person and all the stuff that comes with it. You've lost your co-parent. And this obviously is going to have a different effect if we look at ages of children. So when your children are young, they could be, a huge dynamic in terms of being a single parent and having to raise these children without this co-parent who knows that. When you're older as well, these are the kids that you know and that you talk about and that you share in their victories and that you share in their most difficult times as well. And as a co-parent, you know the dynamics of each of your children. You've been there, and that other dynamic of then having to worry and care for your children who've lost their parent as well. So losing your co-parent is a whole different thing to look at. Lost plans for the future and special occasions. So one of the things that we see is that you've often planned things for the future. That holiday that you wanted to go on. When we retire, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do for our house. This is what we do when we celebrate this occasion or that occasion. So it's not that you've lost your past. It's not that you've lost your present. But you've got to grieve for your future as well, for all those things that you had planned that are now going to look very different, and that there's going to be such an empty space in that. Your identity. Your identity is a huge thing. What am I? People want to know this, and I do want to go into this a little bit later on as well. But am I still a wife? Am I still a husband? Am I a widower? Does that make sense to me? Am I married still? Am I single? What am I? What am I? And that's something to really look at. It really has its effect on these really, really basic questions. Changing relationships is an interesting one, because we notice, and we'll also talk about that again, is that some friendships, change a lot in many different ways. Firstly, as we said, there are those couple relationships where suddenly you're not a couple anymore, or the friendships that were more based on your spouse's side because it was their friends and you came along with it, or they were the original person. Some people might be scared, or they don't know what to say, or you just don't feel that you connect with them anymore. There's a lot of changing in relationships, right? I also feel on the other side of it, and I'll look at that there might be opportunity for new relationships and new people. And often there's almost a dynamic that the people you really thought were close and were going to be there for you sometimes aren't. But the people who you didn't expect often step forward and are with you in a real way. But we'll look at that a little bit at that dynamic. I just wanted to give a little note here on unexpected versus expected. And obviously we could talk a lot more about that, but I just think it's an important dynamic just to keep in mind, and something that does come up in the groups as well. I'm sure Karen would agree that, that there's a very different dynamic between an expected loss that comes from an illness or a long illness of some sort, and something very unexpected, as what we call a sudden loss. Now, both of these are huge losses that need to be navigated, and there's a lot of grief and mourning that happens in both of these. And it's also interesting to look at the dynamics. So, for example, if it's somebody that is where it's more expected, and I want to say expected with these two fingers up. I don't know if you can see me in the little screen here, but it's never expected. it's always a shock to some degree. We never really expect it. But when somebody has been ill for a long time, what we often notice is there are little losses along the way, right? There's almost a preparation in some ways that you can start talking, start thinking, start in some way, and these little losses, especially if the person's been ill for a long time. Whereas when we look at that sudden loss, that very unexpected loss, one of the things we see is that the disbelief and shock can be, just absolutely overwhelming and can last for a very, very long time. There's this real sense. Now, there is disbelief and shock, in long illnesses, but specifically with the sudden death, it can be, just so much more exacerbated. Also just things such as anger and jittery and hypervigilance and really feeling on edge. And that kind of dynamic also comes through. But a lot of the things will come through in different ways. And as we know, every relationship is so different. And there's so many aspects that we look at in the way we grieve in terms of our personalities, our outlooks to life, the relationship. But I think just one of the aspects I wanted to look at is this unexpected versus expected, because I think it often comes up. Okay, so I wanted to maybe just at this point look at a little reflection. And I just saw this quote that I thought was so beautiful that I wanted to share with you. And what it says here in this quote is, "In these moments of heartbreaking grief, I remember the only reason we have an empty space is because we were blessed with someone who loved us so beautifully, it occupied an entire part of our soul." And if we say that grief is the price of love, right? You don't have grief. I can't remember who says it, but somebody says that, if you never want to feel grief, great. You don't ever have to feel grief ever, but then you don't get to feel love either. They come together. Grief is the other side of love, or a different word for love, if you like, right? And in these moments to realize I'm grieving so heavily because I had such a special relationship. I had such a beautiful person who occupied my soul and my heart in such an incredible way. And that is why I grieve. And I just thought this was such a beautiful thing just to bring in at this point. Karen, I don't know if you have any thoughts. I like to just leave these spaces for reflection and perhaps if there are any questions.
I think that's so true, and something that I have heard a lot in the grief groups that I run, Lara, is that lots of there've been many comments around that kind of idea, that I think that this is so hard for me because I love that person so much, and comments like, I would never, ever take anything away. Knowing now how hard this is and how terrible my grief feels, I would still do it again. And I think that comes up a lot. And people do have this hard time with grief because of the nature of the relationship that they had with their spouse. I think that's absolute testimony to what they've lost. And it's a difficult one, but it comes up a lot. And I love that quote because I actually think that it's really true.
Yeah.
One of the other things that is also often comes up a lot that you mentioned, which I thought was so true, is sorting out the practical stuff. So a lot of people have their roles. In the house, there's certain people that you have your role. That if there's something wrong with the fridge, it's either your problem or your spouse's problem, and everyone kind of takes on a role. Maybe someone's in charge of finances, maybe someone's more the fixer things around the house when things go wrong or when there needs a little bit of admin done. And those are a lot of practical stuff that people find more difficult to take on. Firstly, maybe they don't know about how to take it on because it wasn't their problem, but then also just highlights that person's absence when these things do happen, and then you have to take them on.
Yeah. How do I cook a meal if I've never done that or never had to? How do I, phone and organize my car insurance if that wasn't something that I've ever had to do or for many years haven't had to think about? So to pick up those pieces in a practical way can, I think, be so overwhelming. Absolutely.
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially if you are really still in the beginning stages of your grief, it may also feel just that it's too much to deal with.
Yeah. Karen, I'm wondering, do we have any questions at this stage, or should we move on for
I
now?
think let's move on, and we'll get to the questions in a little while.
Okay, so let's get a little bit further on into this process then. Okay, so I've called the slide what the grieving process may look like. And I think that the reason I've done that is that we need to understand, and I think I actually have this on the next slide here. Absolutely, this is it. That each person's grief is as unique as their fingerprint. And I just absolutely love this quote. I think it's actually the beginning of a quote, but I've just taken this extract out because I just love that, because we think of the uniqueness of each of our fingerprints. No two are the same, and no two grief processes are the same. It is completely unique. So I'm always careful when I talk about the grief process to say this is what it may look like. Some of the things, you will relate to and say, yes, I'm feeling that. And some of the things you'll say, that's not so much part of my process. Or some of the things might feel that the volume is lower or the volume is higher in some ways. So I think just, before we even go there, just to say that this is such a unique process, and that's how it should be. Okay. So when I look at the grief process, I always have to look at it from a holistic point of view. We are holistic beings. We don't grieve in one way. We love in every way. We're in relationships in every way, and therefore we're going to grieve in every way. So often there's a lot of conversation or a lot of focus on the emotional part of the grieving, because it is so intense and just feels like almost all encompassing. And I always say we need to make room to look at the physical effects of grieving, cognitively, what does it mean for our minds, how we grieve socially, how we grieve spiritually. So when we look at emotionally, I still love the 5 stages of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I think that sometimes they are misunderstood when people think of them in a linear way, and people often will say, well, that's not how it works at all. But they were never meant to be taught or to be understood in a linear way. They're meant to be looked at in terms of different stages at different times. And I just think there's something about each of them that is so deep and helps us to normalize these completely abnormal experiences that we're going through, and to understand that there's an intelligence in them as well, such as denial, which often such a bad rep where people go, this person's in denial. Denial just allows us to take small bites, to process slowly. We cannot process this all at once. We just cannot. This is too big, right? Anger, I'm not going to go into now, because we have a slide coming up specifically on anger, because I think it's actually an important one to talk about. Bargaining. Could I have done that? Should I have done that? If I do this, could this happen? Right? Combating our feeling of absolute helplessness. And I think that's such a thing, absolute helplessness. And, especially in a world where we feel that we can do things and that we have some sort of control or some sort of mastery in some way, and suddenly we feel so helpless. How can we do this? And we start to bargain and try to find a way. Depression, right? This is the part where people think depression is sadness. Depression isn't sadness. For anyone who's been through depression, depression is a lack of emotion. It's like a void, and very, very painful, empty void that we feel. And the depression part of us is when we're starting to really process the unprocessable, really, right? And that's where the depression comes. And then acceptance, which is also misunderstood, right? Because acceptance doesn't mean that I'm okay with this, right? Acceptance means I understand that this has happened. I'm going to move forward with this. This is painful, but I understand that this is the reality of what's happened, and I'm going to move forward with this. Okay. When we look at how do we deal with this physically, so we look at a whole array of things, but just what I've highlighted here is trouble sleeping, because that's such a huge part, and sleep we'll come to just now as well. It's just such a huge part of the grieving process, and potentially recovery as well. Little interest in food, little interest in, any activities that you may have liked before. And also what we're finding really common is just feeling aches and pains and malaise, and just this feeling of being unwell, just really physically being unwell. Okay, cognitively. So often people will say they feel like they're going mad. They just feel like they can't concentrate and they're making mistakes and they're forgetting things, or they can't make a decision. And as we said, forgetfulness, and so common, so common. And just to be aware that that's part of it. That's part of this busy mind trying to, make sense of something that, as I say, doesn't make sense at all, right? And then you ask it to remember a grocery list, and then you ask it to, do something on an Excel spreadsheet, right? We've got to go slowly and understand that that's going to be part of it. Socially, so the loneliness is something huge that we're going to talk about also in the next couple of minutes. Isolating, and isolating can come from a few different ways. So if we look at the depression element, we might be isolating ourselves because we might just not want to socialize or see people or be with people, right? Or the other way around, that we feel isolated because we feel that all those avenues that we had for socializing, or people are distancing, or people aren't there for us, or people aren't there for us in the way we need them, which leads to the changes in relationships. And then spiritually, we may find ourselves feeling angry, if we are so inclined, angry at fate, angry at God, if that's a word you use, searching for meaning, searching for how could this have happened, and almost feeling a spiritual void or emptiness there as well. Okay, so as I said, I wanted to focus. You just see here. Yeah, so I wanted to focus here specifically on 3 elements of the grieving process. So the first element I wanted to focus on here was anger. And this really comes up a lot and often used in different words. So sometimes people don't use the word anger. They will use the word, I'm feeling just very snappy or very irritable or very annoyed or just so frustrated, all in the family. That's all in the family. And what is anger really about? Anger is really trying to make sense of the injustice of this event, the injustice of what just happened. And we see it towards all sorts of things. So we see it towards the self, right? What you did or didn't do during the life and death of a loved one, right? Maybe I did too much, maybe I did too little, maybe I should have done this, shouldn't have done. One of the things we say in my group is don't shit on yourselves, SHUOLD. Don't shit on yourselves and don't shit on other people. It gets very messy, but we shit on ourselves. I should have done this. I shouldn't have done that, right? Why didn't I not do more? Why didn't I get him to see the doctor earlier? Why didn't I notice that something was wrong? Why didn't I, why did I do that? Also, sometimes, in terms of self, there can be an argument that you had or an unresolved issue that will sit with you and you can feel really angry, but we'll get that more in terms of the guilt. But there can be like an anger to yourself in terms of that as well. Towards your spouse, how could you leave me? How could you leave me? Right? How dare you leave me? Right? Why aren't you here with me? And then, of course, the other aspect of that is that people often say, I wish it was me, not you. Why is it you, not me? Towards others, so often we see towards medical personnel, why couldn't they do more? Perhaps they were negligent, or perhaps it was a perceived negligence. Perhaps they could have done more in some ways, or perhaps we think they could have done more. We also might feel angry to people who haven't experienced such a loss. People are just, happily going on their lives. Right? That's just not fair. How come you get to do that when my life is turned upside down? Right? How can you be happy when I'm not? Towards the situation, as we say, just the injustice of this event that left you feeling absolutely powerless, and towards God or fate, which we've spoken about before. And I think just 2 things I always say about anger is that one is anger the feeling, right? So anger the feeling is absolutely okay. We're allowed to feel angry. It's normal to feel angry. Angry, as we said, and there's lots of different names and words that we can use for anger, but that is part of it. It's an absolute normal part of the grieving process. We're allowed to feel it. Anger, the behavior, however, can sometimes, not be helpful for us, be ineffective for us in terms of perhaps isolating us from people we need or just not getting us what we want, right? Hurting others or hurting ourselves. So to be able to differentiate between the feeling and the behavior. Okay, so then if I can't lash out at people, what can I do, right? The best thing to do with anger is to be able to express it and talk about it in a safe place, to be able to reach out and to talk about it in a safe place to the right people in the right time, the right people who can really, really hear it. And by talking about anger, so one of the things I even say to my group members, and they know that we always check in with an emotion word, and one of the reasons I do that with them is I say to them that even speaking the word, saying the emotions, saying I am angry, already dials the volume down a little bit. Because what you're doing by putting a word, we call it name it to tame it. By already saying the word, you're accessing this frontal lobe, the frontal part of your mind, right? That is there to make sense of things, that is there to calm us, that is there to empathize with us, with ourselves and with others. So yeah, feeling versus behavior, to be able to find a safe place to express and to reach out and to talk. Okay, so let's look a little bit at guilt. And I really wanted to look at that because I think that when grief comes with guilt, it can often just eat us alive. It can often just makes a painful experience even worse. And one of the things, I remember looking at this specifically in one of my groups, and there was such a feeling of relief because when I said, let's talk about maybe guilt, has this come up for anyone? And I explained a little bit what I'm going to talk to you about now. And there was such a feeling of, we're all feeling this to some way. It's not just me, right? We're all feeling that, which, by the way, is one of the incredible, powerful natures of a group. It's not just me, right? These are human experiences. So grief of a spouse is fertile ground for feelings of guilt, right? How did you treat your partner? Who of us can always say we treated our partner perfectly, right? But you will say, how did I treat? Could I have done something different? Is there something I said or didn't say? What was the last words I said? Were those the last words I wanted to say? Why didn't I do that? Why did I do this? Right? There's also the sense of survivor's guilt. Why did I survive and you didn't? Right? What did I do? I've heard people say, but he was so much better than me. He was such a kinder person, such a better person. Why do I get to survive? Why do I get to sit in this house that we built together? Why do I get to enjoy my children and my grandchildren? And my partner doesn't. Which leads us to the next point. Any enjoyment or pleasure felt feels like it's tinged with guilt, right? How can I experience enjoyment or pleasure? And I remember once in my group, I actually gave a homework exercise to the group to look for an enjoyable thing to do for themselves in the week, to put something in their positive emotional bank account. And it was almost like I was giving permission, like a professional was giving permission for you to have enjoyment or pleasure, right? Because it's so tinged with guilt. How can I feel that if I'm grieving? I didn't do enough for him or her. I could have done more. And I think just to say that I think this is so important for people to understand that guilt is a normal part of the grieving process. It's often a very big relief for people to know this. This is a normal part of the grieving process. And also to understand this is a normal part of relationships. As I started off by saying, who is a perfect partner? No one, ever. Everyone has things they regret in their relationships. That is the normal part. The abnormal part is now you've got to deal with that in your grief, right? The normal part is having regrets in relationships. Every relationship has that. No one is the perfect partner. We all make mistakes or say things we regret or have arguments. That's in every single relationship. So to just normalize that and to understand. And as I say, it was just, when this came up in one of my groups, I could just see what a relief it was to be able to say, okay, it's not just me. This is something that's part of the process. I don't have to own it. I don't have to carry this burden of guilt. And I think guilt can feel like such a burden. We don't have to carry it. We can see it for what it is as well. Loneliness. This is a huge part of losing a spouse. Separated from the person you vowed to love forever. And it leaves us with this deep sense of loneliness. This was your romantic partner, companion, a friend, someone who hangs out with you, a confidant. This was your main person and your life partner. There's an empty space at the table and next to you in bed. So, often people say, go to bed. That's often people's place to go. But when bed isn't a salvation, because you're going to bed and there's this gaping hole next to you, this empty space where there was always somebody there, is often extremely, extremely painful and comes up a lot. What we spoke about before here, the loss of connections. So people stay away, right? Sometimes they just don't understand. I was speaking to a woman the other day who was saying, she feels that she's lost her friends because, or not lost them, but she feels such a different, more superficial type relationship because they don't know what to say to her. She lost her spouse, or what I think is quite young, and many of her friends haven't gone through that. And they just stay away and they don't know what to say. They don't know what to say, and it creates an awkward place for her. And I think that's such a common thing. People not understanding, people staying away, and it leaves, such a feeling of loneliness. And this brings me to my next point where I say being alone and being lonely can sometimes be two different things. And this is something that comes up a lot, that people say, I'm so lonely, especially when I'm with a lot of people. I just look around and I just feel so lonely. And what I always say is that perhaps is the worst loneliness of all, right? Being alone can sometimes be okay. And often sometimes some of my members will say that they get used to, being alone sometimes, and sometimes they, can enjoy some aspects of the space and independence, but it's the loneliness that gets overbearing. And the loneliness can happen when we're alone, but the loneliness can also happen when we're surrounded by people, sometimes well-meaning people. And that's very painful. Often if you are caring for somebody else, so let's say you are the person caring for your spouse for a long period of time, perhaps even then you were isolating yourself because you were so busy caring for your spouse, then he or she passes on and there's this big space, right? And you haven't been socializing before. You haven't been socializing for a long time. There's this big gap and this big space, and it's just gaping and sitting there with you. Also just looking at practical barriers, and I know sometimes it comes out. Sometimes you're also not well. There's illness, there's COVID, which we know has really affected, over the past couple of years, so much the way people interact and are able to socialize and be together. So sometimes there's practical barriers, financial barriers. Maybe you can't afford to go out when other people can. So there's often practical barriers to be looking out there. And reaching out can often feel absolutely overwhelming, depending on what stage you are, if you think about that and when you're ready. So what I say to people is small steps in the right time when you're ready. A tiny, tiny step. Perhaps there's one phone call you can make to somebody who feels safe, and they can come over for a cup of tea because you don't feel ready to go out yet. Reaching out in small, small ways. Small ways. And I think that that can be really, really powerful. I am going to come to this later on when we look at the healing process. But for me, one of the most powerful ways of reaching out is a support group. I was saying to my support group the other day, I was saying, isn't it incredible that you're all here? Because at some point you clicked a link, you opened yourself up in some small way to this. And look what you've achieved. You've got this incredible support and this incredible journey and these incredible people who are there for you and care for you and understand because you did one small thing. You pressed a link, you said yes. So often it's these tiny little steps and we reap incredible rewards from them. So here's just my reflection, and I just love this little graph here where we say healing looks different for everyone. And I love the words on this graph. I used this in my group recently, and it was just so wonderful to see that there's no linear way of grieving, as I said, that these words, shock, numbness, denial, self-care, panic, guilt, anxiety, depression, loneliness, hope, therapy, anger, addiction, support, acceptance. And, there's so many different times in the grieving process where just one of these words will resonate more than the other. And that might be that a week later you look at this graph and another word comes up for you in some ways, or a word that's not even on this graph. But one of the things I say is that healing is not linear. It's not a linear process. It goes up and down and up and down. And as I said, it's a very, very unique process, as unique as your fingerprint. Karen, any thoughts or questions at this point?
There are a few questions. I just wanted to make a comment on that picture. I think that is so true, that it's really not a one-size-fits-all approach to grieving. Everybody has their unique experience and different things that will work for them. And I think that one of the advantages of a group is that you get to share that. You get to share that with your other group members. So they share in their grief, but they also share in their triumphs. You know, they share in their little triumphs. With someone may suggest something that worked for them, and that may or may not resonate for another group member. But when it does, to see somebody nodding with a realization is so rewarding and just equally helpful for them to say, you know, I tried that and it didn't work for me, because it also you learn what works for you and you learn what doesn't. But that's so true. One of the questions that I do have, which actually links to when you were talking in the beginning, Lara, about the different stages of grief, and acceptance being one of them. So what I find so helpful is that when you say acceptance doesn't mean I'm okay with this. I think that that's something that people often misunderstand acceptance to be. And one of the questions that I do have is from Barry, who's saying, I lost my wife a year ago and I'm feeling like I'm ready to have a companion. I'm craving adult company, someone to share things with. But my children are much older and no longer at home, and we're very, very attached to their mom. But I'm reluctant to tell them. How do I break the news to them?
Oh gosh, Barry, that's a very, very tricky one. Firstly, thank you for asking that, and for putting yourself out there by asking a question like that. And I think that, you know, two things I'm going to say, and I'd love to hear, Karen, your thoughts as well. But we're not always going to be ready at the same time. So sometimes you'll find that your children are pushing you to, and you don't feel ready. In this case, it's vice versa. So we're not all going to feel ready at the same time. But I think the fact that you yourself seem to have clarity that this is something you need, right? I think that that's beautiful. The second thing I'm going to say is that what happens always in life, but specifically in these kind of scenarios, is we have to have what I call a courageous conversation. To sit down with our children and to say, yes, I'm your dad, and I'm also a person, right? And I also have needs. And this is something that I need. And perhaps even this is something that your mom would have wanted as well. And can we talk about this? And how can we navigate this in a way that honors your relationship with your mother as well? So that would be something that I'm not sure if that's helpful. I do have a slide towards the end when we look specifically at dating as well.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Lara. I think it's always important to keep in mind is that open and honest communication with our children around grief is really, really important, no matter how old they are. You know, obviously have to be age appropriate conversations that we have with them, but from being very little to adult and out of the home, these kind of conversations are really important, because they need to happen so that everybody is honest about where they are in their grieving process, and that's the best way that you can support each other.
Yeah, open conversation. I think that substitutes that. And as I say, sometimes those conversations are tricky. They take a lot of courage, but they're very important. And often when they're you know, done in the right way, with the right intention, with good intentions, which it sounds like you certainly have here. And we can consciously look at how do I move forward in a way that I want to, as well as at the same time honoring the loss of my wife and your mother. How do we do that in a way that feels comfortable for all of us?
Okay, thank you. I've got one more question from Sue, who's saying, my friend's trying to get me to go out because they know that it's something I would enjoy doing. I know they're right and they're just trying, but I feel guilty going out and enjoying myself. when I actually am grieving?
Gosh, Sue, okay, there were lots of different things in here. So I think the first thing I would say, because I'm struggling even in that question, to really separate what you want and what your friends want, what you are ready for and what your friends are ready for. So I think that for me, that would be the first step, right? To be able to separate what, because often our friends want us to do things because it will make them feel better, not because it will make us feel better, right? So I think that sometimes it's important for us to separate what do they want and what do I want, right? If it is something that I do want to do, right, how does going out work for me? Where does my boundary lie, right? What do I want to say yes to? What do I want to say no to? Does going out mean going dancing, or does going out mean going for coffee, right? What is going to feel comfortable for me if this is something I truly want and feel ready for now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also to say that being able to have small pockets or moments where you are enjoying yourself doesn't mean you're not grieving anymore. They're kind of not mutually exclusive. You are allowed, we are allowed to have moments where we can just feel relaxed or feel like we're enjoying something. It can be something as simple as enjoying the sunshine sitting on a bench. It doesn't take away from your grieving.
I love that. Absolutely. I was saying that the other day in one of my groups, that we can hold both in our heads at the same time. We can hold the grief and we can hold some joy, some happiness, something at the same time. They don't, as you say, they're not mutually exclusive. They don't negate one another. They can be held at the same time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lara. I think let's carry on for now, and then we'll see if there are other questions further on.
Okay, so finding yourself again, the journey towards healing. Okay, so one of the things I just say all the time is there's no right and wrongs here. As I said, we don't shit on ourselves, we don't shit on other people. There's no timelines, there's no the right way to do it. Allow yourself to grieve. Allow yourself to grieve in your own way. Be true to that. Allow yourself to do that. Feel your feelings and talk about them, right? Feel your feelings. You're allowed to have those feelings. What feeling are you feeling at the moment? One of the things it's a deep need we have as human beings, and specifically when we're grieving, is to be able to express our feelings. To say, as I said before, I'm feeling so angry. How could this have happened? Or I'm just feeling so sad today. Or I'm just feeling so lonely. Being able to allow ourselves to feel each of those feelings as and when they come up for us, and then to be able to talk about them in a safe place, in the right time, to the right people. Okay. Finding a support system. So one of the things we know that when it comes to things like grief or trauma, before we even do any grief or trauma work, what we need to do is we need to identify strengths, right? Who do you have in your support system? Who is on your team? Right? And sometimes it's people that you might even, you might not even recognize, right? Maybe it's your therapist. Maybe it's your psychologist. Maybe it's that sister that you never thought would come through. Maybe it's not a person at all. Maybe it's a dog. Maybe it's a cat. These are the people that are in my support group, right? These are my people in my support system. The next point is to join a support group. And I have to put that in just because I have seen firsthand over many years the absolute power of this, and it cannot. I can't overstate how powerful this is. To be able to literally have a circle of people around you who absolutely get it, who understand. Not that they understand exactly, because as we say, each person has their unique process that they go through. But you really get it, and I'll tell you now, and you will know this, that if somebody hasn't been through it, they just don't get it. And I think what's so beautiful when I look at the circle support groups is that people are matched so that they're with somebody who really does get it, who might be at the same stage or the same type of loss, but also that's facilitated by a mental health professional, somebody who can really give that, the added element of the support plus the therapeutic input. So you're really having both of that in a really, really powerful way. So joining a support group for me is probably one of the best things you can do, if not the best thing you can do. Avoid the wrong people, or at least letting them in. I have to put that there because, I think it's David Kessler who says we live in a grief illiterate society. And I don't want to say that they're the wrong people, which is why I've put it in italics there, but there's just people who are not going to be good for us in this process, and we need to put boundaries in. Now, unfortunately, which I put the slash in at least letting them in, is that sometimes those people are people that we have to interact with because they might be related to us or our boss, or we work with them and we don't have the power to avoid them completely. Then we've got to try to put a big boundary in, and an emotional boundary to say, okay, that person doesn't get it, right? I'm not going to go to that person for support. I'm not going to seek that person out, right? And I'm going to understand when they say things that are inappropriate or just aren't okay, that there's a big boundary. They can't come in. Grief is hard work, self-care and self-love, right? One of the things that I love is, and I think it's Brené Brown, he says, talk to yourself as you would a good friend, right? Are we good friends to ourselves? Because this is hard. This is hard work. And as we say, there's no way around it. There's only a way through, right? Can you self-care during this time? And I'm going to look a little bit at what that means. How do I love myself in this time? With all these hard emotions and things I have to do, how can I take care of myself? How can I be kind to myself at this time? Do things when the time is right. And I think that's an answer also to our question there for Sue, right? The time is right for you, not for everyone else. So when the time is right for you, I'm not on your timeline, right? I'm on my own timeline. And I will know when it's right for me. And I will go at the pace I need. So do things when the time is right, not before. Celebrate your memories. I know one of the things that Karen has taught me is memories are remembered. By remembering someone, we remember them, we bring them back, be it through talking about what happened, through photos, through photo albums, through stories, through narrative, through words. Celebrate those memories, right? As we said at the beginning, we are feeling this grief and this loss because we had such a special place in our heart for someone, because we were so blessed to be so loved. Build new kinds of connections. So just because somebody's gone doesn't mean we can't connect with them, right? We connect with them in different ways. We connect with them through talking to them, through writing them letters, through looking at pictures, through keeping a place at the table, through honoring them in some way, through finishing a project that perhaps they started, through going to a restaurant that they loved, through whatever means we can, keeping that connection alive. Reestablishing your identity is a huge one. How do we reestablish our identity? Am I as I said, when do I take off my wedding ring? Can I still call myself a wife? Can I still call myself a husband? Yes. Right? You can do all of that. Reestablish who you are. And I could go on a lot about identity, but I am looking at our time. So I'm just going to briefly say that identity is something that comes from you, not from the society. You get to reestablish your identity from the inside out. Taking care of yourself, boundaries. Where do I say yes? Where do I say no? Know your boundaries. Eat right, sleep right, see your doctor if you need to. Right? The power of routine. There's research that says that resilient people have routines, make plans and be active. And here's some simple ideas. Take a walk with a friend, volunteer, try an exercise class, offer to watch your grandchildren, consider adopting a pet, take a class at a nearby center, college or recreation center. Stay in touch with family and friends, either in person or online. And online has given us a lot of opportunities to do this. Avoid hasty decisions. Only do what you need to do when you need to do it, and the rest when you are ready. So do what you need to do when you need to do it, and the rest when you are ready. So some of the things that you might want to consider are the legalities, such as a new will, updated advances on care plan, joint property, such as a house or car to be put in your name. Again, when you are ready. Check on changes you might need to make in your health, your life, your car, and homeowners insurance. Make a list of bills you will need to pay in the next few months, whether it's taxes or insurance, etc. When you're ready to go through your husband's or wife's clothes and other personal items, I love this 3-pile rule. So the 1 pile are the things that I know that I want to get rid of. The other pile is the pile that I know that I want to keep. And the 3rd pile, I'm not sure. right? I'm not sure that's what they help. Ask your children or others to help. This is often a very bonding thing, to be able to help in a way to celebrate memories. Remember this thing. Remember when he wore this. Remember when she did this. That's something to, to include people in, to reach out and to join with people when you are ready, not before that. And set aside items as personal reminders of your spouse. There are things that you want to keep, and there's things you want to give to other people to keep, such as children or friends, and often objects of some sort hold such value for us and hold a piece of someone and a story and a memory. Okay, dating. Okay, so again, we all grieve differently and we must respect our own process. I know I'm saying that a lot, but I need to reiterate that. Some people will say never. I will never get married again. And that's okay. That's absolutely okay. That's a choice. Some people will say, I'm afraid of getting attached to someone new, right? What if I lose that person too? I cannot go through this again, right? There can be a lot of fear for so many people. And I think it was Barry earlier in this webinar who said, what about the loneliness factor? And I think that's something that really does present itself. People want a companion. People are lonely, and that often is something that pushes people to say, now it feels right for me. Now this is a time where I'd like to look for somebody else. And then there's those conflicting feelings of love and guilt, right? Perhaps you do need more time, or perhaps there will always be an element of guilt there, right? We've discussed guilt as well. The possibility to be happy in a new relationship, right? And to understand that this relationship will be different. What you had with your spouse was unique. That is not replicable. A new relationship will be different. So I think we said this a little bit before, but as we said with happiness, loving and grieving can happen at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. They don't negate one another. And your guilt will lessen over time. But again, to end off to say this is your life and your relationship. Do what is most comfortable for you. Moving on? No. Moving forward. So we don't move on from grief. We move forward with it. Always. And I think there were these two quotes that I wanted to end with. This one saying that trauma creates change you don't choose. Healing creates change you do choose. And I think that, by making these small choices in the right time when we're ready can be, incredibly, incredibly powerful for us when we're grieving. And I wanted to end off with this quote, which I absolutely love. And it says, life has to end. Love doesn't. Love goes on forever. And I just thought that was the most beautiful, beautiful quote to almost bring us full circle to grief being the other side of love. And that is our end of our presentation today. Thank you so much for joining us.
I love that quote at the end. Thank you, Lara. It really does bring us back full circle. And just to say that when you are grieving, you are allowed to feel happy, and you will feel the feeling of joy again. And it does feel that when you are in it, it will never ever happen. But just from testimonies of thousands of people and people who I speak to weekly in my own grief groups, we know that it does in different ways, in different shapes, in different forms, but we absolutely do know that it does. So there is hope, and unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. The questions that have still come in, we will answer just individually to you. But I want to just take a moment to thank Lara for being with us here today and sharing your wisdom, and to thank all of you for attending and participating. I hope that you're leaving today feeling better, having taken the first step in your healing journey by joining our webinar. And now that you've taken that first step, an amazing second step would be to join Circles. And in doing so, you will find a group of people who not only know exactly what you're going through, but who are going to support you every step of the way. So that being said, as I mentioned earlier, we do have a special offer. If you're using, it should be on your screen, using the code support30, you will get a 30% discount to Circles for 3 months, and you should receive an email shortly, straight after this webinar, with all the details of how to join a circle. And starting now, you'll no longer have to navigate this journey alone. So thank you again for joining us, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Karen. Everyone be well.